So I'm so grateful, as always, to have you with us on this gorgeous, I hope it's as beautiful wherever you are, because spring green in the fall is pretty extraordinary. So I'm looking out my window at a gorgeous fall day. But again, I wish we were all in John's place together. I want to, as we're coming in, talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. This is our play talk on Oedipus, and I'm really excited to have Jessica Lanius, or Jess as we know her, here to talk with us. She's a frequent collaborator with us at APT, and I'll read her extraordinary bio when I invite her to join us. But she was the movement director on this play. And I know that there's always a group of us who have seen the play. I've, of course, got to see it many times, and some of you who haven't seen it. I don't think it's going to spoil any of this for those of you who haven't seen it. We will talk, because I know many of you are APT at home viewers, and Jake Penner, who will be joining us as well, who's the assistant director, will talk a little bit about our APT at home on Oedipus. And I think we may be ready to, I'll give it another minute. I'll give it another 38 seconds of awkward vamping. Anybody who is following the story of my finger, my little cast is off, and I'm able to remonstrate people with more alacrity. Okay, we're good to go. Great, no more vamping. I would love to invite Jake Penner, who was the assistant director on this project and who is an artistic associate and on our year-round artistic staff, who works with Brenda and I and Evelyn Matten on season planning and casting and all the things we're doing. Markedly, not only ADing this, but working on our Creating the Classics of Tomorrow new play series, which is an exciting new initiative. And also, Jessica Lanius, who is going to be our guest today. Hey, good morning, Jess. Thank you so much for being here. I'd love to start just by thanking you both for taking your time to talk about this play and your extraordinary work on Oedipus. And I love using Gwendolyn Rice's headline, which is APT's Oedipus is a triumph. And I think it is. It was an extraordinarily brave, I don't know. I mean, everything about this is so outside of our comfort zone that it feels sort of audacious in a great way. But I'm just going to let them know a little bit about you, Jess. And then for our guests and for our audience to know, I'm going to kind of turn the Q&A over to Jake, because Jake and Jess were in the room together for the 5 weeks of building this beautiful show. And so I'd love for Jake to dig in a little bit about Jess's work. But here's who she is. It's wonderful to watch your face while I describe your many accomplishments, Jess. Jessica has worked as an actor, both on stage, television, and in commercials in New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, and now Madison, Wisconsin, where she's based. Recent roles include Catherine in The Next Room or the Vibrator play at Forward Theater Company, Charlotte in Charlotte's Web at the Children's Theater of Madison, in the ensemble of The Bed, a Theater Lila invention, and appearing as Suzanne Weber in NBC's Chicago PD. Jessica holds an MFA in acting from Rutgers University, a BFA in acting from UW-Stevens Point, where she also teaches, I believe. As a theater maker, performer, and director, Jessica focuses on telling stories on stage that are multidisciplinary inventions that inspire, surprise, or engage audiences in unconventional ways. Building new works in collaboration with musicians, writers, designers, poets, artists, and performers of all kinds. She seeks to answer the question, what story does our community need to experience right now when diving into a project? While in New York, she created and co-founded Theater Lila, for which she and co-founder Andrea Arden-Reese developed an ensemble style of the rehearsal process to create and develop new works. In 2014, Jessica transplanted Theater Lila to Madison and began producing Theater Lila at the Overture Center for the Arts. For Theater Lila, Jessica directed No Child, Trash, a Theater Lila invention, The Mojo and the Say So by Aisha Rahman in collaboration with Bronzeville Arts Ensemble, Big Fish in collaboration with Four Seasons Theater, The Bed, a Theater Lila invention with James DeVita, and adaptations of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet and A Midsummer Night's Dream. Jessica has been choreographing and designing movement for APT's play since 2015, including productions of Mary's Wedding, Cyrano de Bergerac, Macbeth, Born Yesterday, Merry Wives of Windsor, A Doll's House, An Ideal Husband, Book of Will, Edward Albee's Seascape, She Stoops to Conquer, and Twelfth Night. She is so excited to be playing the APT Woods for a sixth season this year more than ever. Thank you to I'm saying all the thanks, which you say so beautifully in this, and that you're union members of both SAG, AFTRA, Equity. And this year, we're also in the acting company. So we got to use your talents to the height because you understudied two roles, both Mistress Quickly and Cleopatra, in our first production, An Improbable Fiction, which was a hoot to watch you jump back and forth between both those roles. Okay, that is all they need to see me speak, but I'm just going to be an enthusiastic listener as you all talk about this beautiful production, which is very different from some of the choreographing you've done in our other work. Mm-hmm. So take it away, Jake and Jess.
Thank you, Carrie. Thanks so much for that introduction. Hey, Jess, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
It's good to see you again. It's odd seeing you on the box because we've just spent the last 5 weeks in a room together. Yeah, so I know that before we jump in, Carrie had alluded to something about our APT at Home series. She mentioned that some of you are coming to us through that channel. Thank you so much for going with us on this ride. This is the first time we've done any sort of filming of plays here at APT. So normally it's a really quick turnaround time to plan, shoot, and edit and post those plays. It's always gone great. We've been able to operate within that timeline. However, on Oedipus, we had a sudden health concern come up with one of the members of the crew of HMS Media, who we've partnered with this season to film all of those APT at Home plays. So rather than push things before that individual was ready to jump back into work, and while also trying to get the best capture that we possibly could for you all, we decided to delay that until this coming Tuesday. So keep your eyes open for it. I promise it's coming. It's just coming a little later than usual. So with that said, Jess, how about we talk a little bit about Oedipus?
All right.
So Carrie had mentioned that you've been here now for going on, I guess this is your 6th season. Can you talk a little bit about what it was that enticed you back to APT this season? What was it about Oedipus that you thought might be interesting to work on as a choreographer and movement director?
Yeah, thanks. First, I just want to say good morning and thank you for having me as your guest, all of you. And also and this links to your question, thank you for creating a whole season of work that we could come back and be a part of. And I think what drew me to this and why I absolutely said yes the moment David Daniel texted me about this was, one, because here we are in the middle of a pandemic and hadn't been working. And also because David Daniel called me. And the why was really about the how he was looking at doing this piece that drew me in. The first thing he said was, I want to create this whole ensemble feeling and I want to have movement in the work. And I said, oh, great. Can you send me the script? I'd love to see. He's like, it's just Oedipus. Don't worry about the script. So this is what we're going to do. And I was like, yeah, but it's been a few years since I've read Oedipus and I probably would want to look at that. But it was so much about learning more about how he wanted to tell this story in this time with what we're all going through and what he has adapted in the script. Anyway, it was an easy yes for all sorts of reasons. But selfishly for me, it was such a unique opportunity to get a call from someone from APT to say, this is the style in which I want to work, which is this really ensemble building sort of piece in a poetic piece in a Greek tragedy, right? And that's what really interested me the most.
So as Jess had just alluded to, this is, for those of you who don't know, it's an original adaptation that David Daniel has written for us. And that is probably the subject of its own play talk or blog post at some time in the future about how that whole thing came together. And so I'm just curious about this now, Jess. So he came to you. I didn't know this part of it. He said, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's just the dusty academic version of Oedipus that we all remember from school." I'm not right. Did he not tell you that he was writing an original adaptation in iambic pentameter over the course of, like, I don't know, 15 hours before he spit out that first draft?
He just didn't. It wasn't the focus of our conversation. I don't know if maybe that was because we were talking about bringing me on board, and he's so humble too. Like, I don't know, but to him, yeah, he was just like, yeah. And then when I finally got him to send me the adaptation, I really fell in love with what he was doing in there, and all the ways that he was using poetry and deconstructing a little bit, adding bits of contemporary moments that felt really accessible, and I knew that it was something special, and started to imagine all the things that we could do with it from the beginning, from seeing the script and then hearing that. I had no idea. So I have not worked with David, certainly not as a director, movement director relationship. I have admired his work as an actor for so long. So really that was also a big part of it. It was like, wow, David Daniel is going to direct. He's so playful. He's an ideas person. I just wanted to be in the room with him, and I wanted to see what he was going to do. And then I started to learn when we finally got in the room together. We spent our first meetup was sometime in July. We spent, I think, 3.5 hours, the two of us, physically playing. And we went into that meeting and I thought, well, I wonder what this is going to be like. I had no idea that David has this toolbox and all this information about really physical theater. Like we talk about Lecoq, and I just didn't know that part of him. And so it was such a treat to be like, oh my gosh, I feel like I've met my person. Like we speak the same language and shared so much of the same vocabulary and ideas. And I think both of us, it was a little, we're ideas people. And so it was really like this, and how about this, and how about this? And it was all of a sudden it was 3.5 hours later. I'm like, I should probably go home now. But we just really played so freely, and that was exciting. And then it led, obviously we jumped in the room together, and that was a whole nother learning process.
So along these lines, I also didn't know about David's enthusiasm or experience with the movement or the physical side of theater, more so than we've traditionally done here at APT. Mm-hmm. But I remember when we first read the draft, and Carrie was involved in this process as well. We saw a sample of writing from David early in the process that was sort of okay, we should do this now, go write the rest of the script. And I noticed right away the colloquial language at times, right? How we're using language that you would hear in everyday use now. And then I was also noting some of the humor that I was seeing in Oedipus Rex, one of the older and more intense tragedies ever put on the page or the stage. And so immediately when I see those two things from David, I sort of started to picture something different. Like, okay, this could maybe be something that I had never considered possible with a play like Oedipus before. And so I'm wondering if what was your reaction to seeing that sort of everyday language, or the times that the play gets really funny, particularly with one of the characters coming in late in the game? Did that sort of notch open a doorway or a path that you hadn't quite expected you would when you read his adaptation?
I think definitely. I think that's what made it inviting. I feel like if it had been really traditional or sort of dusty, right? Like I don't know. I think it just gave it, and it's often the kind of work that I like to do, that I feel drawn to as an audience member and as a creative person, is really like, how are people going to care about this today? Like really, like, how are they going to care about this? And I think those little touches were huge in making that possible and letting us in. And even for myself, I don't fancy myself an academic, and I want to be moved, and I want to feel like it has something to do with me and my people today and the world. And yeah, I laughed. I was like, yeah, okay. The moments where, Tiresias says, damn, or, sit down, old man. And just those, and it's just such nuanced little touches that I think help us. They just help us as an audience member. I'm trying to think if that inspired me as far as thinking about physical vocabulary. I think it cracked open the door for when folks see the play. There's a section, course number 3, as we called it in the room, which was a challenging section, but that sort of lent itself to the course members sort of being at these pulpits and being more, it felt like a town hall, and that it could go into this contemporary feeling of like, hey, I recognize that feels like our world too. And that moments like that can work, as well as moments like the opening where it feels very ritualistic and it feels like a prayer, it feels like a Greek play, that we can go back and forth, and we're sort of teaching the audience that that's okay, and that it just feels inclusive. It feels like it includes us in the way we see things, the way we think today. And I'm always drawn to that. I think it's the way to go as far as when you're looking at classics, and it's like, how do you make it something that I care about as audience?
Yeah, yeah, and I it's funny that you mentioned the progression of the choral pieces. I believe we're in the neighborhood of 5 or 6 choral pieces throughout Oedipus, 5 with maybe one short one.
Mm-hmm.
And Carrie, you had mentioned critic Gwen Rice's write-up about this piece that came out a few days ago, and she actually noted this in the script, that it's something that starts, like you said, Jess, as a little bit more formal, those choral pieces, and they sort of progressively come a little bit more contemporary or human or immediate in some way. And I mean, to me, as somebody who was sitting there as an assistant director watching this process more than participating in it, I mean, that was one of the things that stood out for me. That was when I watched you and David moving in that direction of starting with a chorus that is much more how we would think Greek classical theater would go, and then gradually sort of move into, no, these are actual people with their own points of view and opinions. That to me is speaking exactly to what you're talking about. What is our way in? How do we grab a hold of this story? How do we make it feel current and relevant and important to our lives right now, even if looking at something tragic might seem scary right now, given the world that we've all just sort of encountered. Can you talk a little bit at all about how you and David decided on that trajectory for the choral pieces? How, do we start formal and then gradually become less formal, more contemporary? Was that something that you had planned ahead of time, or was that really something that you discovered in the room over time?
Yeah, David, being the mastermind with the script, I'm sure I'm imagining he imagined that. We didn't talk about it. It wasn't discussed. I think so much revealed itself in the rehearsal room and together. And I think, so that'd be a good question I'd like to ask him. I'm not sure if he knew. I think maybe he did speak to that a little bit, like, yeah, I want to go here, and then we're going to go back there. So I think he had a better picture. I think I was learning in the room as we went along. Yeah. Our process was truncated because of COVID. I mean, really, normally, I don't know if folks know this, but as a part of the artistic team, I would normally have been brought into conversations in December, right? And then we would have meetings and design conference, and there'd be a whole process of working together. And because of COVID, everything was just different. And there's pros and cons to that. And I think one of the things was there wasn't time for all of that, sort of letting it digest and really have deep conversations. It was like, go, let's do this. And so much of the work happened in the room before rehearsal, after rehearsal. As you know, like, I think I was, and I hadn't worked with Dee Dee before. And so we were new partners. And so there's a lot of just trying to get in his head and figure out what those choruses were, what the whole piece, how it would come together and what it would feel like and look like. And I mean, that to me now looking back was really the joy and the satisfying part of being an artist in the room with another person who I admire and trust, and which is also challenging, but that's kind of the good part too, is like, how do I understand what you want so that I can create and get inside your mastermind artistic brain. And so as we formed our relationship, I think it became more and more clear what the pieces, how they would come about, how they would move, what we wanted to lean into, what we weren't leaning into, right? A lot of that. David and I just had a quick exchange at the end after opening, and one of the things he brought up, which I thought was great too, that we finally built this relationship where it could just be a look across the room as they were doing something. We tried something, and we'd either go, no, or we'd go, maybe, or it'd be like, yeah, because we started to know what we were looking for. I started to learn what he was after, and I think he was a little, he was always so open to me trying things, and we both knew in the moment it just became obvious, like, yeah, that works, or no, it doesn't. And occasionally there was me saying, yeah, I love that, and he'd be like, no, or vice versa, So, I mean, that's part of the work, is whether it's being an actor, working with a director, trying things, they like it, they don't. It's collaboration, right? Which is
Yeah.
not always easy, but always rewarding.
Yeah, and there was a lot that we pulled out collectively from that negotiation of the rehearsal process, right? I mean, I feel like those moments of disagreements in rehearsal are almost more fruitful in the end, because they force you to find whatever that common ground is ultimately, that allows for you to I guess find a deeper truth in whatever it is that the moment is calling for, that you're trying to find.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I have sort of been in each other's orbits for a while, coming from the Madison theater scene, and I'd always really admired your work, both as a director and as an artistic director at Theater Lila, because in many ways it was the most unique thing that I was seeing in that community. So APT has gradually made movement and choreography more of a focus in recent years, even though we're still a text-based, poetry-based, language-based theater. Do you approach choreography differently at a classical theater or a language-based theater like ours than you might at other companies, or is the process roughly the same? I mean, what are you doing here at APT that is unique to APT that you're maybe not doing somewhere else?
Well, interestingly enough, I feel like my company I hadn't thought about it this way, and it's certainly not necessarily in our mission statement, but all of the work that we've done with Theater Lila is poetic and language based, and oftentimes classical work, because even well, not the new works, but there's so much poetry in them, because I think that language, that imagery lends itself to physical poetry, which is how I see it. You know, I'm not a writer per se, but choreography vocabulary is like writing to me. It's what is happening there. What is the essence of what someone's feeling? What is the essence of this image, and how can I reflect it or expand upon it in a way that words can't? Or maybe the words are there and then we fill in the gap. And so it feels, the work that I've done at APT feels like it was a very easy transition. In fact, some ways it was like, oh, how nice to just work on the movement, because at Theater Lila, it's everything, right? It's being in charge of the story and the movement. And so it was a real gift. Actually, Carrie made this happen. She came to a production of Lila's couple, and I think after Suitcase Dreams, reached out and said, would you like to do some movement work or choreography on Merry Wives and Seascape that season? And honestly, that's the first time another company had reached out to me to do that work. I feel like I made Theater Lila with my colleague and pal, and we were just genuinely interested in, curious in experimenting to find out. We didn't know what was going to work. We wanted to play and experiment and see what would work. And all that experimentation led to productions and kind of finding a voice and a consistency, and still interested in, does it work? Can we do this? And it was pretty, these interviews make me look back and go, oh, how did I get here? And I think Carrie Cannon, you played such a huge part in this idea that, oh, there's interest outside of Theater Lila, which feels like this laboratory that in other companies where I could be of help or do something artistic and creative alongside a company that doesn't necessarily do that only. But that I think it's been really fun to in all the different shows, and they're all so different, what their requirements were, whether it was choreography or really more of a movement person. So I don't know how, and I've been hired by a few other companies since then, because all of a sudden I'm a movement director. And really it usually is plays that have language at their core, poetry, because those are the pieces, no one's asked me to do Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and figure out where there's movement. Though I'd be up for the challenge.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel that different. I think the difference is I generally feel like, okay, rein it in, Jessica. This isn't, this is APT. Like, what are they willing to do? So I'm learning, and I feel like this project was a good experience to learn how many ideas I can offer, and to be of service of the play and service of the director, right? It's not about, in Leela, I get to sort of hold the big idea and then ask people to join me. Where I'm at American Players Theater, I'm trying to merge myself with the director's vision, the designer's visions, and the actors, right? Because it's so actor based. Like, how do I negotiate and navigate working with all those people that they'll feel comfortable adding, like, what if there's a gesture here? Or like Marcus in An Ideal Husband, what if this little ditty is comedic, like this entrance with his butler, I can't remember, but finding and building those relationships, and sort of navigating how much you can do in a place that doesn't do physical theater works. You know what I mean? Who's starting to, though?
Well, and I was just about to say, I think Oedipus is a project that maybe stretched the boundaries of what we thought was possible, or where we had been comfortable moving at a language-based or poetic-based theater. And you said something that really made me think about some of the work that we had done in the earlier process of rehearsals, getting oriented to the style that David and you were going for. You said that sometimes the words are almost there's almost a limitation. There's almost a point at which words stop being effective, and then you have to keep going in another with another way of expression, I suppose. So like in musical theater, right? Anytime breaking into song, it's like, okay, we can no longer speak these words. The emotional moment is calling for something heightened. And I feel like a lot of the work happening, not just with the chorus, but throughout the piece, even when scenes between named characters are happening, we've got this perimeter of choral work happening. And so we started the process with David bringing us these photographs of either sculptures or paintings of human-like bodies being in various forms of expression, a pure form of pain, or a pure form of pleasure or happiness, or something like that. So he had this idea of tableau. Like every now and again, the chorus or the company would hit this image that is a diluted form of whatever expression is called for in that moment. But like you said, we're an actor-based company. So can you talk a little bit about what it was like to work with some of those actors who maybe aren't used to doing that kind of work? Because it's not something that we do very often here, and yet I can't imagine the Oedipus that we have without those pure forms of emotional tableau. How was it working with them on day one versus maybe day 20?
Well, yeah, so it's like laying that foundation. I think of it like, okay, how do we, with Theater Leela, when last Greek play we did many years ago, we spent 9 months working on it. And so the question is, how do we create this ensemble that's willing to try these things and do these have this physical vocabulary, this physical life in 4 weeks? Do we have 5 weeks of rehearsal?
5 weeks.
And I'm always actually pleasantly surprised that it's, they're actors and they've probably done something like this at some point in their training. And I felt like it happened really quickly. It really was about taking the time to make sure we do just some of that foundational work, which is, as you saw, the simple, like just getting them connected, moving in the space and picking up on each other's energy and moving as one and building community. It's really building trust and building community. And I think if you do that, you lay that foundation, you can do anything, and you can ask them to do anything. Together, they can take risks because we've sort of slowly taught them that this is the way in which we're going to work. And it's not terribly frightening. I'm not coming in to do some modern dance piece with them. It's very much humans, like it's being human, and it's being collectively human, connecting with each other. And then I always talk about, there's these I see them as rubber bands of energy. So we connect, we start close, like in a flock, and really just move as one. And then how can you take that so that everybody is just it's the best kind of acting, right? It's listening, putting your attention on your scene partners, right? And even if there's 10 people, connecting, not taking the attention off yourself and finding each other. And then those rubber bands can stretch to all the way across the space, and they can send focus to the story that may be in the center of the space. And so you start to build this this way of listening, this way of working that is rooted in truth, right? It's the truth of our play and authentic heart, emotion, all of that. And I think by taking the time to build that foundation, then as you saw, like as we go through blocking and rehearsing, there's just a natural, they now know how to work and they're working in that way. And my job becomes really much easier because they're taking care of it. It would take much more time if I were to go in as a choreographer and be like, now you're going to do this and you're going to do this. But really it's collaboration, and it's connecting them so that they feel free and trust each other and trust their own creativity, that this isn't dance. This isn't about being a dancer. This is about being an actor. And what are you feeling, right? Like, what does that look like for you? And how each human being in that space has lived a different life. And so how their body works, how they feel pain, how they feel joy looks different. And it's just saying yes to it and creating a space where they feel like they can put their voice out there, their physical voice. The actors always here are just so willing. And I think that they bought in pretty early. You need buy-in, right? Like, okay, I see where this is going. Okay. And it's good leadership. I think David did a great job of leading the way and building trust. And then we could play and create.
Yeah, and as someone who was, again, watching a lot of this work, because I wasn't taking part in it, at least on the floor of the rehearsal room, it was, I forget the word that I used. We spent about a week just doing movement-based, not exercises, but I think those actors needed time to calibrate to each other's movement, to their energy. They needed to be able to sense each other even when they didn't have eyes on each other, because they were going to have to move in unison so much, or to not move in unison in a really intentional way. That's the other piece that I feel like you and David found. So yeah, and I can tell you that that would not have been the same play without that foundation work, as you're calling it. I mean, they're at a certain point they were actually breathing in unison. I don't know how many of them are aware that they were doing that, but they were, and it's why there's a couple of intentional moments where you all have them breathe in an audible way together. I feel like we wouldn't have found that had they not been able to link up with each other energetically in some of that movement work.
I'm going to want Jess to answer this, but I also want to remind the audience, if you have questions, I'm so riveted by this conversation, as I'm sure everybody else is, but pop questions in the Q&A if you'd like. And Jess, I love the idea of these later career, mid-career actors doing the same ensemble work that one of the most exciting things we do with our apprentice company is, for the past couple of years, we've brought Jess in to do ensemble work with them to build that kind of trust, to know that you need to depend on your scene partners to make things happen. And these are earlier career actors who you're building that trust with, but to do that with, this group of 9 actors who have, 100 years of experience between them, it's pretty extraordinary. But just reminding the audience, they can pop in questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, please do, y'all. We will just keep talking because Jess and I were there together. Yeah, if you have any specific questions, if you've seen the show, if you've not seen the show and you have specific questions about process or how we went about, choosing the play, putting the team together, any of that stuff, Carrie's here as well, so we can talk about artistic administration stuff too. When we were looking at some of the design concepts early on in this process, we noted a couple of things that everybody seems to be noting elsewhere too, right? I mean, it has this really unique costume design. Our designer, Danielle Tyler Matthews, did a wonderful job putting together this sort of heightened design that is somewhat evocative of a classical performance, and yet not, you can't quite place it. It feels contemporary at times, it feels ancient at times, which I think is part of the point. And then David worked with our set designer,
Nate Stuber.
thank you, to put together a set that is almost an anti-set. It's just sort of an empty space. I mean, if you're used to the Up the Hill theater, when we're doing a restoration comedy, there is a lot of stuff on that stage. When it comes to Oedipus, there is next to nothing on that stage apart from the podiums that are sort of in those aisles. Can you talk a little bit about how you were negotiating around the design, or how maybe you leaned into the design once it became an element that was in the rehearsal process later on as we started working on the stage or in tech? I mean, was there anything about those standables that you were like, okay, we have to use this for this, or maybe let's not use that intentionally so that we don't give away something later? I mean, what inspired you about that design?
Well, for me, that is the perfect kind of design. I feel like Nate built this perfect, open, interesting playground. And so it was like, oh, this is our playground. What can we do with it? Like, how can we compose? Where's the most interesting? Where do we have strength and power, and yeah, to me, that's so fun, is just give me some architecture to stand on and lean on. And I really wanted to play with the gravel. It didn't happen, but that's okay. But, just always thinking, like, how could
There's some of that. They stand and they turn on the gravel in this gorgeous moment. And I was like, oh, so you did get it in there, Jess.
We did. And that was thanks, I think the actors, had an idea. I was like, how do we use that sound? It did get in there. Yes. So I was like, at some point, does someone roll down that hill in the back, all dusty? There are certain things you can't do at APT, and I keep learning because I keep forgetting, but like, you can't roll around on the ground too much. You can't put hands up because it gets hot and it gets wet and it's rough because it has to be. And so those are always interesting challenges to work with. But yeah, I loved that kind of set. And David said this from the beginning, that there's no teacups, right? Like, there's nothing to do. Which as an actor can be really intimidating, because it's nice to have a letter to write or something to play with, and it's scary to not have anything. And I think the key was creating this ensemble that is where they're putting their attention. Like, when I think about the activity, right? The Meisner, like, what are we doing? It's like, we're doing this, right? Like, and our attention is just listening. I mean, we had a really great conversation at one point where they were like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like, you're just listening. Like, how do we stage listening 16 different ways? And I think that was part of the challenge, right? Listening and responding. And then costumes as well. It was like, how do we, it's these, and David kept talking about statues, like this idea that we are alive and visceral within these sculptures. And that's what we have. And that's how we create the dynamic of the space. So if someone comes in, how do we throw power to them? Well, that's in composition to me. That's like how you compose that stage, sets up, whether there's lighting or not, sets up a spotlight on that person, depending on where you put all the bodies in the space. So that was just a treat. I think in so many ways, I know so many people around APT campus have talked about it's so different. And so, like, this is and for me, it just felt really natural. It felt like the world that I'm used to. And so it was really comfortable for me. and exciting to be like, we did this here, and there was often times where I'd be like, can we do that, David? Can we do that here? And the answer was usually yes. Yeah, that's what we're doing. So I loved it. That part.
I forgot to ask about the composition and the sound design that Andre Plus did for us, because it is, I don't think I'm ruining anything for anyone who hasn't seen the show, but that sound design is constant. It never actually goes away. And in the moments that it does go away, again, very intentional, because I don't think there's anything that you can do in this play that's not intentional. Everything is there for a purpose. What was it like to work with sound design sort of happening as an underscore at all moments on this play? Was that informing you? I know we sort of injected it into the rehearsal room early on, maybe just to try and inspire some ideas, but did you find that to be helpful, a hindrance, different in any way, or was it something that that gave you even more of a palette to work with?
Well, it was so organic. I think that it just was a natural progression once sound came in to just lift what we were already doing, and for the actors to have that bubble that creates the reality of this play to just lift the energy of gesture, of connection. It felt so natural. You so often, like I know when we worked on Mary's Wedding, it can get you're just really trying to find the perfect thing and work together. And there's so many elements. And gosh, I didn't think about sound much because it felt I never had a moment where I was like, I don't know if that's it, or I don't know. And that's usually what happens. I mean, because you got an artist coming in, you're collaborating. There's always moments where it's like not quite what you imagined or different, or somehow, just part of the process. And gosh, it just always felt like a gift. Like it was like, oh yeah, he just created the container for that moment, like the behind the queen, or the atmosphere of the whole, right? Like just the buzzing and the underscoring of all those moments just felt like such a beautiful, which is a testament to his artistry and talent. Because
I did want to, Nancy McDaniel can't wait to see it, and I can't wait for you to see it either, Nancy, but I wanted to speak just for a second to the design, to the team. So often, from what Jess said, you get the sound designer comes in at tech, which is very late in the process, and starts to lay in their work. But Andre Plus, who's worked with us on quite a few shows, was able to lay in some of those sounds earlier, so the actors don't show up and the director and the rest of the team doesn't show up and say, oh wait, the whole time I'm talking there's sound underneath it. And our voice and text coach on this piece, Rebecca Clark Carey, really has worked with Andre in the past, and the two of them consider themselves co-sound designers, so that the speech is fed and supported by sound as opposed to fighting against it. And this design team, Nate and you, Jess, and Danielle, and Andre, and Rebecca, and Jake, and Dee Dee, it is as tight and cohesive. And I don't want to say out there because it feels like it is all working towards this story, which really has nothing but words and bodies. And those bodies are adorned in such a way that as soon as the play starts, we're we're in for something different. And the sound is underneath that, and the movement is underneath that, and the intentionality is underneath that. And that's everybody working. It feels like the ensemble work you did with those actors was somehow infused into that team as well. That design team as well was feeding off each other. And you use that rubber band image, and you could see, I went up to Andre Plus after first tech and I was like, wow. And he was like, no, I'm sorry. I'm cutting 6 things and adding 4 more. And I was like, yeah. And then it was an extraordinary thing to watch, just as a producer, to watch a team that was new to each other learn each other the way a cast does. We see it a lot in an acting company, but to see that design team grow in understanding of each other's work was really, really extraordinary. And we have a couple more minutes. So thanks, Nancy, for your enthusiasm. I share it.
Thank you for that, Carrie. I don't know. I mean, you're right. I think that because so much discovery was happening in the moment on this one, because we were sort of moving into new territory programming wise with this choice, and the way that it was designed and the way that it was choreographed and everything. I mean, swap out one element of that supporting team, and I think the whole play becomes radically different, because we were figuring out the confluence of all of our interests and talents and predilections in the moment, and that is ultimately what found its way onto the support part of that play. So I guess I really only have one more question from me. Carrie, by all means, jump in. But Jess, what was your favorite part about working on it?
Gosh, that's a good question. Probably collaborating with David and getting to know him, and the generosity that he truly brought. I mean, it wasn't easy at first. And as we built our partnership, I think now looking back, I so appreciated a director who truly wanted to hear all my ideas and was willing to try them. And some people, all directors are different, and sometimes there's space in the room for that, and sometimes there's just not. And it was a real gift to have a director who was so open and willing to try things and willing to take the time. And in the end, I think that that's how we found our partnership. And that is always, always, always the best, to have that together.
I'm so grateful. Yeah. I did want to say that about Dee Dee. Our audience knows him so well as an actor, but as a producing organization, to see his talents grow in this area is so exciting for us as we look towards the future. And his interest, and for a while we talked about American Players Theater, we really sort of just do all this work from the neck up. Like, we're really good at the words. And it's wonderful and exciting to be moving into more physical expression to support the words. I mean, we're not going to become palabolists. That's not our gig. But we are embracing the way that storytelling can be more organically, and it's better for our bodies too, in terms of wellness, and how we can continue to move in this direction is really exciting. And Dee Dee's generosity is really, sometimes you'd be like, stop saying yes. You have to put some parameters around this thing. We did it in casting. This cast is, I mean, I don't even know how to start, but he kept saying, anybody, I trust you. And we're like, no, not anybody. Very, very, very specific people. And he was like, it'll be fine. And I was like, nope, won't be fine. Won't be fine unless it's the right people. So, and I'm grateful for this cast, and for you, Jess, and for you, Jake, to be working with us as an assistant director among the 14 other jobs you have. We lost him for the whole rehearsal process, and we were like, Jake, could you, never mind. So we're glad to have him back, but I'm so grateful to both of you and to our wonderful audience. As Jake said, you'll be getting an email about when you can see APT at home. If you're able, and I know many of you can't, if you're able to see the show in person, it's breathtaking. It literally steals my breath. There are moments that I still can't think about without getting up here. But I know they'll do a beautiful job on the APT at home as well. And next season we'll be back robustly in person. So thank you.